Washington, D.C., March 3, 2025. The air in the city is cold, with political tension hanging thickly over it. A relentless power struggle is unfolding, with words sharp as knives and gazes colder than ice, determining the fate of an entire nation. At the center of this political storm is Tulsi Gabbard, a soldier, a former congresswoman, and now a nominee for Director of National Intelligence, DNI. She is not a typical politician, not a puppet of the system, and that is precisely what makes her the greatest threat to those wielding power from the shadows. Facing her is Senator Mark Whitmore, the leader of the assault against her, seated at the center of the committee. Whitmore taps his pen lightly on the table. Ms. Gabbard, we are here today to assess your qualifications for the position of Director of National Intelligence, a role that demands absolute loyalty to our intelligence and national security agencies. But I must be blunt. You've built your entire political brand on criticizing these very agencies, the CIA, the FBI, the Department of Defense. You've called them machines of deceit, tools of unelected power. You've publicly demanded we tear apart our intelligence system and start over. So how can we trust that you won't destroy these agencies from within if confirmed? How can we place our faith in someone who has spent her career attacking the very institutions she would lead? Senator Whitmore, I understand why you're asking that question, and I'll answer it directly without evasion or dodging, because I don't play your games, and I'm certainly not afraid of your cheap tactics. First of all, I don't destroy agencies, I rebuild them. But I understand why the word transparency terrifies you. Because in your world, a world of backroom deals, whispers in the dark, and puppets on strings, transparency is the greatest threat. If transparency makes these agencies tremble, then perhaps the real question we should be asking isn't whether I'll destroy them, but rather, who's really running this country and what are they hiding? Let me make one thing clear, Senator. I don't criticize the intelligence agencies because I hate them, but because I love this country. I served in the U.S. Army. I fought on blood-soaked battlefields in Iraq and Kuwait, where I saw the real cost of bad policies written by people like you. People who've never held a gun, never looked into the eyes of a dying soldier, never had to explain to a mother why her son would never come home. I criticize these agencies because I've seen them abused, not to protect the American people, but to serve political agendas, to manipulate information, to suppress the very people they were designed to safeguard. So if you want to talk about loyalty, let's talk about mine. Not to a corrupted system, not to a group of unelected bureaucrats, but to the Constitution of the United States and the American people. And if you think that loyalty is a threat, then perhaps you should look in the mirror, Senator, and ask who you've been loyal to all these years. The people or the ones who bought you with money and power? The room seems to crack under the weight of her words. Ms. Gabbard, you're quite skilled at deflecting questions, but I won't let you slip away that easily. I don't care about your touching war stories or your lofty proclamations about the Constitution and the people. I care about one thing, national security. And I'll repeat my question with emphasis so you can't dodge it again. How can we trust that you won't dismantle our intelligence agencies when your entire career has been built on attacking them? How can we place our faith in someone who has called the CIA a criminal organization, the FBI a tool of oppression, and the Department of Defense a war machine serving corporate interests? Senator Whitmore, I'll answer your question. I don't attack the intelligence agencies. I attack their corruption, and I attack people like you who've allowed that corruption to fester. You want examples? Let's talk about the CIA, an agency that once ran MKUltra, experimenting with mind control on American citizens without their consent, leading to dozens of deaths and hundreds of ruined lives. Or the FBI, an agency that ran COINTELPRO, surveilling, harassing, and trying to dismantle civil rights movements, including Martin Luther King Jr., just because they dared to challenge the status quo. And then there's the Department of Defense, an agency that spent trillions of dollars on endless wars in the Middle East, while millions of Americans go without homes, healthcare, or hope. That's not national security, Senator. That's national betrayal, and I won't stand here and pretend it doesn't exist just to appease you. So you ask how I can lead these agencies? The answer is simple: by restoring their true mission, protecting the American people, not suppressing them, providing truth, not lies, serving the Constitution, not political agendas. And if you think that's destruction, then perhaps the problem isn't with me, but with a system that has become so corrupt it views truth as the enemy. So, Senator, let me ask you a question in return. Are you willing to place your trust in a system that has betrayed the American people time and time again? Or will you continue to defend it simply because it serves your interests and those of your donors? Whitmore, for the first time, appears rattled. He taps his fingers on the table, a small but clear sign of frustration, then glances at Senator Moore, a loyal ally who quickly jumps in to salvage the situation. Modern Gabbard, you seem to enjoy playing the hero, but I'd like to circle back to another point. You've made statements that have been cited by extremist groups to justify their opposition to the federal government, from anti-government militias to white nationalists, even groups tied to domestic terrorism. Are you prepared to take responsibility for the consequences of those statements, or will you keep dodging accountability by blaming the government, as you so skillfully just did? Senator Moore, and I take responsibility for one thing: speaking the truth. And the truth, as I've said, is a bitter pill that people like you don't want to swallow. But since you've brought up accountability, I don't serve extremist groups, I don't serve factions, and I certainly don't serve people like you who've spent your careers defending a system that treats the American people as the enemy. You say my statements have fueled extremist groups? Well, under the Biden administration, the FBI targeted American Catholics, labeling them potential domestic terrorists simply for attending traditional Latin masses. That's not a conspiracy theory, it's a fact, documented in an internal FBI memo released in February 2023, which identified conservative Catholics as a national security threat. So, Senator, when our government starts treating faith as a crime, when they turn ordinary citizens into enemies of the state, who's the real threat to our democracy? Me, for daring to speak the truth, or you, for trying to protect a system that's rotting from within? And don't stop there, Senator. Let's talk about how the FBI monitored parents at school board meetings, labeling them potential domestic terrorists just for opposing education policies they believed were harming their children. This was confirmed by a letter from Attorney General Merrick Garland directing the FBI to investigate these parents as national security threats. So, Senator, when our government starts treating free speech as a crime, when they use their power to silence anyone who dares challenge the system, who's the real threat to our democracy? Me, for daring to speak the truth, or you, for staying silent and letting it happen? If you want to talk about accountability, start by looking in the mirror, Senator, and ask yourself what you've done to protect the freedoms you swore to uphold. Ask yourself what you did when our intelligence agencies were used to oppress the very people they were designed to protect. And if you don't have an answer, then maybe you should sit down and let those with the courage to speak the truth, like me, do their job. The room falls silent, a heavy silence, as if the air itself has been drained. After a recess, the atmosphere in the hearing room grows heavier, more charged with tension. Whitmore, returning from the break, appears calmer on the surface, but beneath it, he's seething. He knows this is his last chance to take Tulsi down, and he's prepared a silver bullet, a question designed not just to damage her credibility, but to potentially destroy her entirely. Ms. Gabbard, let's shift to another issue, one that may be even more serious than what we've already discussed. You've repeatedly criticized U.S. foreign policy, particularly in the Middle East. Are you claiming that the Obama administration, an administration respected worldwide, one that brought a Nobel Peace Prize to our president, supported terrorist groups, including al-Qaeda in the Syrian conflict? Answer that question, Ms. Gabbard, and be careful, because what you say today will be recorded and will be used to judge not only your qualifications, but your entire career. Senator Whitmore, through the CIA's Timber Sycamore program, the Obama administration funneled weapons, funding, and training to so-called rebel groups in Syria. And don't try to sidetrack me by claiming these were just harmless opposition groups. Some of them, like Jabhat al-Nusra, had direct ties to al-Qaeda, a terrorist organization that declared war on America and killed thousands of our innocent citizens, including in the September 2001 attacks, which I'm sure you still remember, Senator, or have you forgotten that while busy defending policies that betrayed the very people you swore to protect? This is from a declassified Defense Intelligence Agency report released on August 12, 2012, where our own intelligence analysts warned that supporting rebel groups in Syria could lead to the rise of a Salafi principality. Specifically, I quote, "There is the possibility of establishing a declared or undeclared Salafi principality in eastern Syria, and this is exactly what the supporting powers to the opposition want." And let me make this clear to you, Senator, those supporting powers weren't Russia, weren't China, but the United States, through the CIA's Timber Sycamore program, which spent over $1 billion arming, training, and funding rebel groups, including those with direct ties to al-Qaeda. So, Senator, when we arm our own enemies, when we fund terrorists under the guise of foreign policy, who's the real threat to our national security? Me for daring to expose it, or people like you who stayed silent and let it happen? Gabbard, you're saying that a former president of the United States, a man awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, deliberately supported terrorist groups, and you're claiming that our intelligence agencies, which have protected this nation for decades, were complicit in this? Do you understand the gravity of what you're saying? Senator Whitmore, I don't need to imagine anything. The truth is documented, and I'll read it to you so even someone like you can't pretend it doesn't exist. Here's a report from the State Department released in 2016 warning that continued support for these rebel groups could lead to the rise of new terrorist organizations, including ISIS. So, Senator, if you want to talk about evidence, here it is, right in front of you, in our own government's documents. Not a conspiracy theory, not a smear campaign, but the truth, recorded by the very agencies you claim are protecting us. And if you want to talk about gravity, let's talk about the gravity of arming terrorists who then use those very weapons to kill thousands of innocent people, including Americans. Let's talk about the gravity of spending trillions of dollars on endless wars while millions of Americans lack housing, healthcare, and hope. Let's talk about the gravity of betraying the very values this country was built on, all under the guise of national security. That's what's grave, Senator, not my words, but the actions of the people you've spent your career defending. Gabbles, you're going too far. You're saying the U.S. government deliberately created ISIS? That's an accusation that's not only outrageous, but dangerous. Do you realize that statements like these could undermine our position on the world stage, weaken our ability to confront real threats? Do you realize that your words could be used by our enemies, Russia, China, Iran, to propagandize against us? Do you realize you're putting this country at risk just to score political points? Senator Rounds, I'm not saying the U.S. government created ISIS. I'm saying the U.S. government knew exactly what would happen, and they went ahead with it anyway. The DIA report I just cited isn't a conspiracy theory. It's an official document written by our own intelligence analysts warning that supporting these rebel groups would lead to the rise of a terrorist principality. And what happened, Senator? ISIS rose, ISIS grew, and ISIS killed thousands of innocents, including Americans, all while people like you sat in rooms like this pretending it was just a mistake. And don't try to sidetrack me with talk of Russia, China, or Iran, Senator. Because if you truly cared about protecting this country from external enemies, you wouldn't be sitting here defending a system that armed those enemies. If you truly cared about national security, you'd stand up like I am and demand transparency, accountability, and justice. But I get it, Senator. That would require courage, and courage, I'm afraid, is a quality you lost long ago in the smoke-filled rooms of backroom deals. The hearing room falls silent with only the faint sighs of those witnessing this unrelenting showdown. Tulsi Gabbard's declarations still echo through the space, a challenge to a system that has grown corrupt. So, ladies and gentlemen, Tulsi says, are you willing to face the truth even if it shatters what we've believed? Or will you continue to defend a world where power is built on lies and cover-ups? That question doesn't just reverberate in the room, it leaves a profound mark on every mind present. Because this confrontation in the end isn't just about one woman standing up to the system. It's about each of us. About whether we'll choose to stand for truth or continue living in the shadows of silence and fear. And what about you? Do you have the courage to confront the systems that have become corrupt, or will you keep company with lies just because they make you feel safe? If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to our channel to join us for more exciting content.